Couple things about points I want to make regarding the two articles you read and learning and how to assess different types of learning. So, for how knowledge helps, the major points and concepts I want you to take away involve chunking, working memory, how knowledge helps you not have to think, and how knowledge leads to faster learning. First part, chunking, something that most people find fairly interesting. This idea that if I can combine different bits of information into a whole unit, I can think about it a lot easier. It relates to the second concept of working memory. Working memory is that part of our brain that allows us to manipulate things, to reason, to solve different problems by thinking of things that we're seeing or hearing or watching or feeling right now, combining those with things that have just happened in our past, combining that with things that have happened to us a long time ago, things that are in our long-term memory. What chunking does is it allows us to deal with more information because it doesn't take up as much space in our working memory. Working memory, as you read, the classic research says that you can deal with about 5 to 9 things at a time. And this is different for different people. And this whole research has been called into question. But this is the general idea, is sound, that we can only handle so much. When I chunk things, I'm not just seeing individual bits of information, I'm seeing wholes. For instance, each one of these words to you is a chunk. It happens automatically. You can't stop it from happening. The words I'm saying right now, it's really just sounds that aren't even separated by spaces, but your brain automatically picks it out because you've done it so many times. Individual letters are chunks, right? Concepts are chunks. So when you think of love, right, it's a concept that you can do something with, that you don't have to think about it. It's very complicated, but for you, it's a whole thing. You want concepts that you're teaching to become chunks rather than individual bits of knowledge. And this happens through lots of rehearsal and lots of practice. So building knowledge means getting those connections between different ideas so automatic that they are a single unit. And that frees up more working memory to learn new things or to do higher level thinking, like analyze, evaluate, or synthesize. Another point is that knowledge helps you not have to think. When you go see a doctor, you want to see someone who has kind of seen what you have before. You don't want them figuring out what to do, especially if you're in surgery, right? How should I cut this artery? What would be the best way? There's a standard procedure of how this is done, right? They've done it before. They don't have to think about the small little things, so they can think about the bigger picture things. Likewise, if you ever do any home repair, right? I do home repair and I'm okay at figuring things out. But I'm slow. I'm very slow and I make a lot of mistakes. Whereas a professional drywaller or plumber or electrician can come in and do it in about 1/10 the time it takes me, do a lot better job because they are not having to think about things. They're just doing the basics, right? They've done this job 100 times, 1,000 times, do it again. So oddly, as a teacher, you want your students to think less about some things. You want them to be so automatic that they don't have to think about them. As a teacher, as you develop skills, you will have to think less about certain things. The first time you teach a lesson, especially if it's unfamiliar, it's hard. You're thinking a lot in planning, in rehearsing, and actually doing it. After you've taught it a couple times, it's all automatic, and you can focus on other things like are the students motivated? Is this really the most effective way to do it? How can I adjust on the fly to better meet my students' needs and so on? So this is an odd goal. Knowledge is a great thing, and it helps us not have to think, and that's a good thing as well. The final point from that article is that knowledge leads to faster learning. the more you know about something, the easier it is for new information to be put into that knowledge network. When you are first learning a foreign language, for instance, it's really hard to be thinking about pronunciation, to be thinking about sentence structure, to be thinking about how you might say something to get the intended meaning across. As you know more, this becomes easier and vocabulary can grow faster, new sentences can grow faster, basically everything can grow faster. This is important because in your class you will have lots of students with different levels of readiness. And one of the goals that you will have is to get everybody to be proficient. Now, what that means is that you will have to not pay as much attention to the kids who are already ahead. And you will often be told that you should try to reduce the achievement gap in your schools. And the achievement gap exists when kids get to school because of differences in their home life. And if we actually did a good job of teaching every student the same in that we challenge them all the time, that gap that existed when they enter K4 or K5 or grade 1 would only get bigger and bigger over time because the kids who come in really ready can learn a lot faster. What typically happens is that we spend most of our time with the kids who are behind, and we don't really differentiate for the kids who are ahead. The funding is at least $10,000 to 1 to get kids up to speed rather than to challenge those kids who are above grade level. And many schools don't have any resources or any real program for challenging advanced learners, especially the ones who are really advanced. But this idea that the more you know, the faster you learn is important when you're thinking about how students are going to grow and how you yourself are going to grow, right? It's a lot of work to get the ball rolling, but once it gets rolling, things happen pretty fast. As far as the critical thinking article, 3 things I want to talk about. What critical thinking is for us in this class. It has at least 5 dozen definitions that people have used over the years. We're going to focus on this one because I think it works well with Bloom's taxonomy and how you assess and teach students how to think critically. Then I'll also want to teach about how you teach it and then how you assess it. So, what is it? Well, in the article, Willingham points out 3 things: novelty, self-direction, and success. The novelty part is that if I'm solving a problem that I've solved before, right, a lot of that's going to be recall. There may be times where I've forgotten, but there's no real evidence that I'm not just going through the motions. And so when somebody is actually engaged in critical thinking, they are dealing with a new problem, a new surface structure, sometimes a new deep structure, and so on. The second thing is self-direction. Students or learners need to internalize all the different steps that they need to follow in order to solve a problem or draw a conclusion or analyze a report or whatever. This means that you need to get them to understand all the steps, and you can't provide them with a worksheet or a handout that's going to tell them what to do. All that needs to become automatic and internalized. The final thing is success, meaning that if you try to synthesize things and it doesn't work, well, you can't really say that you thought critically in any real sense. Now, it does depend that there are varying levels of degree. And so I may have thought correctly about some things and not others, and therefore I got the wrong answer. But some critical thinking did happen along the way. It's not an all or nothing thing. If you want to teach critical thinking then, 1, you need to build background knowledge, which is the How Knowledge Helps article. The background knowledge is important. The chunks need to be there. The facts need to be automatic so you can do higher level things. It's hard to think critically about something you know nothing about. Second step, directly teach the strategies and processes. You can't just kind of take kids through a problem and assume that they are picking up on all the things that they are going to look for. Model your thought, talk out loud, write them down, give them a checklist, right? And directly teach them how to do that. This is how we take apart a sentence. This is how we construct a letter. This is how we write a short story. This is how we solve this math problem, right? Make the steps very clear. The final thing then is give lots of practice using a lot of surface examples of a single deep structure so people really can see what it looks like, right? So I've used the example of an ecosystem, I think, or a government, right? The government of the ecosystem can look a lot of different ways on the surface, but there's always going to be fundamentally some core things that don't change. Give them exposure. Then model that whole process, step by step, guiding them very heavily at first, and then gradually release responsibility to them. If you want to assess it, you have to give very open-ended tasks that don't have a lot of structure. In other words, if I gave you a critical thinking task and I gave you step-by-step directions how to solve it, you wouldn't be thinking critically. In this case, I really want to see if you have all these processes and if the ideas are organized right in your head. And so I can't give you that structure. I can't give you a detailed rubric. I can't give you a set of directions. I just have to say, do this, solve this math problem, analyze this piece of artwork, or whatever. If I give too much direction, right, I violate one quality. If I give them a surface structure they've seen before, the novelty criteria is violated. And finally, I need to think about what success or failure looks like. And this goes into planning how I teach, sharing this with the students so they know how to self-assess. And this takes a lot of time. So as I said in our first meeting, higher level thinking goals, critical thinking, we think of typically as analysis, evaluation, and synthesis. Those should be reserved for unit level goals unless you can use a bunch of other stuff that you've been teaching over the year or that they've learned in years past. But when you're starting from scratch, it takes a long time to build up to that. So each day having an application or comprehension goal is good, and then maybe an analysis, evaluation, or synthesis goal at the unit level, whether that unit is 1 week, 2 weeks, or as many as 10 weeks. And that's it. Going forward, I will be sending out some feedback on the quizzes, but I need to wait till everyone finishes them. They are due this weekend, so I will send that out on Monday. Have a great weekend.